This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and we'll get started. I'm Jared Davis, the CTE principal for WSWHE BOCES in Saratoga, and it's my pleasure to welcome Patrick Darfler-Sweeney with us this morning to talk about the face of the component schools. Before we get started, we just have a brief message from our sponsor that Jamie's going to play for us, and then we will dive in.
Welcome to the real world of virtual reality on the zSpace platform. What is zSpace? It's a tabletop virtual reality that's transforming education today, regardless of whether students are learning at school or remotely. zSpace functions as your typical Windows PC until you open a zSpace application, and then the magic really begins. Long story short, zSpace tracks the user's stylus in real time, allowing the user to comfortably reach in, interact, move around, dissect, blow up, or change different variables within the environment.
All right, thank you, Jamie. So without further ado, here's Patrick. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the session if you have questions. And to draw your attention to the chat, Patrick has added a link to the slide deck that he is sharing with everyone. Patrick, it's all yours.
Thank you. I hope everybody's doing well. That three-dimensional demonstration just beforehand, wow. I got to go play with that a little bit. Anyway, thank you for being here. My name is Pat Darfler-Sweeney. I spent over 38 years in pre-K to 12th grade education, 18 years as a classroom teacher, the balance of the other years as an administrator. I've been a dean of students, director of athletics, principal, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and retired as superintendent. Most recently, I was consulting with SED out of the research fund, and I served as project manager for a P20 partnership principal preparation program. I think someone from Shakespeare was there with all the P's. Anyway, as was already mentioned in Jared's introduction, in the chat room, I put a link to the presentation itself. It's important that you, if you are here for resources and everything, which I hope you are, to click on that, make a copy of it yourself. Everything is in there. Essentially, we're talking about a topic that could take months, and we have less than an hour to go through it. So what I really want to do, the way I designed the presentation, was to give you some things to think about, and I have targeted resources to help you expand upon. Most of the resources I have, especially the ones that I designed, which are the other documents there, they're really designed not as an end all or a prescription, but a way for you to sort of adapt whatever you need to do. Within the presentation you'll see the link sign here. That's indicative that there is something with it. The object here is just to give you an idea for it. I want to thank all of you for everything that you do. Administrators and leaders that we have within our schools have certainly been tested, to say the least, in the last 2 years, but we've always been tested. We've been tested in many ways, in many fronts. So most of you are with BOCES. You may or may not know, and this link will take you to the SED site where it shows the history of BOCES. BOCES was actually developed to be an intermediate school district. And what they were thinking of in the post-World War II era, 1948, was primarily to develop for rural schools, cooperative intermediate schools that could share resources and educational services in a platform, where they could go together and be able to have it more affordably and what have you. What they found out was that having a separate entity with the board, a BOCES board itself, was far more efficient. And there were actually no intermediate school districts that were ever established. In fact, in 72, they got rid of it. In 1968, BOCES were allowed to have buildings to house specific programs. And as things always evolve, it's interesting. As I was my last few years as superintendent, we were hitting some rough economic times. The idea of regional schools in a lot of rural areas, BOCES being the center, came up again as an idea. And again, it's the same as the intermediate school districts in a lot of ways. Anyway, so who do you serve as a BOCES or as a CTE center? You have a lot of areas that serve as tension points that are inherent with the different groups you look at: boards of education, faculty members, support staff, communities. Couple of things to keep in mind, to think about. What are those tensions within those groups? Does the supporting program mean that we sacrifice supporting our home faculty and staff? To be truthfully honest here, besides my background, my wife is a teacher at BOCES in the Otsego Northern Catskill BOCES, or ONC BOCES. So I live with it too. Do we get to give the impression that our singular motivation is to keep students in our programs regardless of behavior, program efficacy, or actual needs? These are all things that really challenge us as leaders in what we have to do and how we manage that, because we are a service-driven organization. And in doing that, those areas are the things that we really have to get a handle on. And if you're really to break it down, there are, being the face of the component schools and the customers you're serving really envelops itself in 3 major areas: program development of career tech, career education, marketing those programs and the services that the institution provides, and then the vehicle that makes all of that happen and is the role of being the liaison, all right, or being that face to go back and forth. And it's interesting, the BOCES superintendent, it sort of serves an interesting sort of position in everything of the organization. The BOCES superintendent and BOCES is there to serve the component districts and those customers, but at the same time, the district superintendent is the commissioner in the field. And you can tell as a history teacher, right? Back in 1909, the district superintendent position was put in play across all New York State. And then in the school district, you had supervising principals, pre-superintendents in those districts. And that district superintendent being the eyes of Albany, if you will, all over the state. That role was assumed when BOCES were developed in that cooperative education. So the BOCES, while serving as the needs for the component districts, also is an educational leader in assisting those districts to look beyond what they have right now and what they can be doing in the future. One of the important things to understand is your communication and leadership.
What we've got here is failure to communicate. Some men you just can't reach. So you get what we had here last week, which is the way he wants. Well, he gets. I don't like it any more than you do.
Hopefully that isn't your way of actually reaching out and communicating with anybody, but I can't help to use an old Paul Newman reference. Cool Hand Luke, for those of you who are interested in those things, was the movie that's from. But in communicating, okay, and the style of leadership we bring to bear on that is important to note. One of the resources we have here is what is a leadership style that you have. This is a great quick survey for you to sort of reflect on your own leadership style. And what I would challenge you to do, and then what you can do is look at it and then try to match it up with what are the things that you're trying to accomplish. Does that leadership style fit that? You know, it really can generate a lot of self-reflection in how you approach things and what's the reason why you're approaching things the way you are. One interesting sort of activity you could do is take that yourself and then give it to somebody that works with you or alongside you and ask them to fill it out with you in mind. And then take a look at, you know, what their response is. You know, is it the same as the way you see yourself? And if it's not, you know, perhaps there's some time there to sort of work on what you're trying to do and get the match up for it. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to do that. There we go. So when we talk about being the faces of the school districts, we first take a look at the program development itself. What is it that you're trying to do and how do you go about doing it? You know, your choice is really to be proactive or reactive in what you're doing. The danger about being reactive is while you keep everybody happy in the sense that you're giving them what they want, A, you have to make sure that you know what they want, and B, are you really attending to your other position, which is as an educational leader, to assist them to see things, not necessarily dictate to them, but to see things. One of my favorite sayings is to get off your seat and knock on doors. That's the G-rated version of it. But in doing that, I go back and I think about the first time I was ever hired as a teacher at Queensbury High School up by Lake George. One thing that they did that stuck with me throughout my entire career, and we're talking this now was in the early 1980s, that they put all the new teachers on school buses and actually drove us around the entire school district. Queensbury is a huge school district, but it was mainly to get a sense of, this is the community that you're serving. This is the community that you're going to be teaching its children and what have you. You need to really do the same thing with the communities that you're serving, school districts or audiences, however you define that to be. What I put here is a sort of visitation checklist. A lot of new administrators said, yes, I'll go and I'll visit all the school districts. And they sit in the office and have coffee with an administrator or two. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, that's inclusive, of course, because you need that relationship. But you really need to look at what that community can do. And what you have here is a basic checklist where it talks about what are some of the suggested actions that you should do within those communities to develop relationships and develop a sense of what it is you're actually serving. Like anybody else has always said in the past, if you don't know what the target is that you're aiming for, you probably are not going to hit it. So in looking at the program development itself, you're looking at the community. You're looking at the special education. I mean, let's face it. One of the biggest components that BOCES or career and technical education does is serve the special education service. This link is from SED, and I tried to do that with SED links. They're in here because I know how massive the website is, and people get lost pretty quickly. This way, you can just click on it. This one specifically, if I can pull it up. Anyway, it talks about the specific things that you can do with and for special ed children as they're moving forward out of the system itself and the community liaison position that's involved with it. This area here talks about assessing a community's needs, and there's some activities in there to do it. And then finally, it's about finding demographic information for the communities you serve in. This here talks specifically about areas that you can go to, whether it's websites for facts about communities, data, city data, data US, and data hubs. All these things are just tools for you. But the overall thing to keep in mind is that you're trying to get a handle on the community itself. What does the community have? What does it need? And how does that translate into you as an educational community? I thank many of you who filled out that pre-survey form that we had here. And one of the terms I put in is collaborative and collaboration. What does that mean to you? And many of you wrote some wonderful things about what collaboration could be and everything else. This here is just an overall sort of scope of what collaboration is. But two things I want to point out that are essential. One, the written communication, okay? A lot of people make difficult choices. They write, and they write with such passion what they're doing that they forget the purpose of what they're writing. In other words, you're not trying to hit these people over with a sledgehammer about how much you like something, but it's to invite them into a environment that their voice can be heard and that you can together develop something. The other piece of it, of course, is what skills do they have to bring to bear to this? Because you're the board of the Cooperating Education Service, and you're the one responsible for this. You have to understand what the players that you're working with have in terms of skill sets. And we're talking about technical skill sets. I mean, if you're going to start sending people emails and links and everything else like that, you have to be certain that they actually know how to manipulate those things. Otherwise, you're going to get bogged down in things that are going to get in the way of what you're trying to do itself. All right. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us that that our idea of digital literacy and fluency is lacking. When I was serving as the SED program director, one of the things I had to do with this partnership was review many of the schools of education's principal preparation programs. And I got to tell you, there is a dearth, a complete lack prior to, and we're talking about 2018 here, of any sort of digital instruction leadership. Right? It just doesn't exist. Now, we could go on forever as to why it doesn't exist or anything else like that, but that doesn't help us right now. The result was we were producing leaders and have continued to produce leaders that may not have any grounding in this to begin with. So a couple of things have happened. Number one, people have said, oh my God, we don't know how to do this. And not only the instructors and the administrators, but the support staffs too. So when you're developing your program and everything else, you can't forget about the support staff, the teaching of it, and the use of it throughout the system. I'm talking about secretaries, support staff members, anybody that you have to communicate with. That doesn't even include the new computer science and digital literacy standards that SED has put out and said that we have to teach K-12. And the other piece of it is the analog piece of it, all right, the ability to write, okay? This resource here talks about written communication, business style for leaders, okay? And it's to help assist with that. And I've mentioned this before. we get very excited about things. We get very passionate. We write about it, you know, whatever. But we sometimes forget that in the written communication, which is essential even on digital platforms, is to remember what is the purpose of it? Why are we writing? Make sure you have somebody that can proofread for you. One of the things that, you know, I remember distinctly when I was a new superintendent, I wrote this, what I thought was a fabulous memo. Of course we did, right? All superintendents have egos. My secretary takes a hold of it and she goes, you know, Pat, it's great that, you know, you have your doctorate and stuff like that, and this is great, but no one's going to understand this. And she reminded me of something that I was taught years ago, and that is the acronym of KISS. Keep it simple, Simon. But the point being, of course, is that being clear of what you're doing, one does not exclude the other. Fluency and literacy are skill sets that go beyond the medium of what we're doing. But to dismiss the digital piece of it is at your own peril at this point. The marketing of it. The reality is that your organization's success depends on being able to maintain the original purpose of the organization. Okay, you were established to help school districts with educational resources and services. Okay, if the component districts are not participating, then your existence is not needed. Okay, and that's where that tension point comes up a lot with your own teachers and support staff. They're like, my God, the only thing here is to make everybody happy. What I'm suggesting here is that while that piece of it is obviously important, it's also important that you understand. In other words, being proactive and not react. What are the things that you're trying to do? Do they make a lot of sense? In this resource, we talk about, I've developed it and borrowed a basic marketing flow of what you want to do. And again, this is not an end-all process. It's not, you know, you can adapt it, modify, copy, or throw it out. Just make it your own needs. But primarily what we're talking about here is all that, you know, travel that you've done. You've assessed what the component districts needs. You've looked at the demographics of the area you have. It's beginning to connect those points of the program in collaboration with the component schools and what you have, assessing what needs that you have in terms of maybe further instruction, professional development, or learning of individuals to make sure that the tools that you're going to use are going to make a lot of sense. The other idea to come around with your program development is personalizing your recruitment process. And this is where the lessons that we've learned, particularly with digital fluency, have become huge. All right. Almost all emerging school systems right now have people that are in charge of being liaison or social media platforms. Somebody has that responsibility. What you need to do as leaders is coordinate it and making sure that you're not serving the ends of the platform, but the platform is serving the ends that you need. In terms of, you know, and these last few things that I want to talk about before we talk about questions or anything are some of the other resources you can have. Open house, for example. Here's something that I want to make sure that you understand. Open house doesn't have to happen in the first 6 weeks of school, okay? And too many organizations have a very sort of limiting idea of what open house is. You know, it's for the parents so they can see what their kids are doing. Well, we need to go much further than that on that. I mean, given everything that we've experienced, especially in the last 2 years, we just don't want to be that limited, all right? We just don't want to be that limited. We want to be able to take our programs and have sort of a recurring sort of cycle of reflection and improvement of what we have, using the trips that you have, taking your work-based learning coordinator and making them an active recruiting piece of it. You have all the career technical education. Oh, and just one point about that. A lot of people use the term VOTEC and CTE interchangeably. They're not. CTE is an overriding idea of teaching career and technical and academic skill sets to make a lifelong learner and to be able to do what they can. VOTEC is the limiting sort of training specific in the skill, craft, or what have you. So what we're talking about here is CTE that envelops some programs of VOTEC. So I'm not, there's a clear distinction between the two things we're doing. The idea of a lot of programs that you have in CTE is they have a lot of advisory staff, or they're supposed to have advisory councils. These people need to be more than the one night, give them a nice dinner, listen to what they have to say. But the idea of what they can do to bring to the curriculum and everything. This goes back to the open house. Why not make it a community open house? Yes, for the parents, but also for the agencies that you have, so they can see that their input is something that grows with it. So we look here, and you look at advisory committee portal. This is just an idea. Again, taking your advisory committee, instead of it being that one night thing, developing a portal or a place where they can connect to, where they can offer continuous ideas of what's going on in the field, or ideas that they have where their businesses are and what they're doing within the context of the community, and they can build on it. So there's some ideas here for you to take a look at. I mean, there's no right or wrong place where it can be housed or anything like that. But the key point is that your advisory council people have an opportunity to continually keep on that conversation. Bring them into the open house. Make sure that they're there. A lot of people like calendars. They always ask me for calendars. So what we have here is a CTE building administrator, work-based learning, the CDOS calendar of events. Again, this is just a guide, but it will give you an idea of the sort of 12-month, process that many administrators and schools go through. Also note that I make sure that you have it in there, you have vacation sometime during the summer. But the idea, of course, is being able to take these things and make it part of your practice throughout the entire year. As a leader, some ideas to keep your sanity, okay? You don't work for the PTA or Booster Club. You work for the students, and you work for the component districts, the students in those component districts. That's who ultimately you always are serving. And that needs to be the driving influence of what you do as leaders. How will the action that I take look on page 1? I've given this advice to all administrators across all domains. It was the best piece of advice I ever had. You have a lot of people that tell you, no decision has to be made unless the building's on fire. Okay. But if you want to, sort of crystallize that, anything you do, stop for a second and create the imaginary headline in your head. And that's going to be on page 1 of the newspaper. If you can live with it, you're probably okay. If you got the heebie-jeebies about it, maybe you need to pull back and think about it before you go ahead. You're service oriented, okay? Always ask your people, what can I do to help you be great, okay? And mean it, and follow it up with something, okay? The best leaders are not necessarily the ones that are standing in front waving swords. Many of them are the ones that are promoting the people that they're working with. Quiet is not always a good sign, okay? Even though we had a pre-conversation before we were on here about the surviving of Catholic school, while the nuns might have liked, quiet as church and working, it's not necessarily a good sign because you don't see the energy in there. Quiet can mean concentration, but it also can be lack of energy. Keep that in mind. And finally, in terms of rules, educators know how to be reflective. Great educators do something about that, and that is something that you all should consider. A couple of other tools here I pulled out. You probably have heard about Bitmojis and stuff. This is an actual classroom, and this teacher, who, yes, she looks like my wife. Yep, it's her. Anyway, the point is that in doing this, she's able to embed everything that her course and program is going on. And she updates this daily in terms of what there is for their classroom. These are actual pictures of the classroom. And in this slide here are all the embedded things for it. Just an idea. Again, that idea of the open house not necessarily being that one-shot adventure thing, but keeping it going and connecting that to it. The idea that the component districts can easily access something to see what is going on and give them the opportunity to contribute to that. Another one here, see if I can go back. There we go. The other one here is a program that a student did on a museum walk. But again, these can also be the digital way to have your open house, to having it go hand in hand. And in this, you have all of these places here. And when it's in a presentation mode, okay, you can click into any of these and you go through it. It's a sort of a digital collage, if you will, of program and what we're doing here. Okay. These are other resources that you have. I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in digital education, recruitment, and training. Alan November is one of the best nationally recognized and globally recognized digital education leaders. He wrote a book called Who Owns the Learning? This link here actually goes to his company, November Learning's website, and it's chock full of resources and ways in which educators and administrators can go ahead and do things. These are here about how to create a podcast, how to create a digital sort of video that you could use. And then here, Screencastify that you might know. A bunch of tools that digitally you can use to continually promote your programs and vice versa, that they can actually share back with you also. Because, keep in mind that the benefits of a digital thing, besides like what we're doing today, being sitting in our classrooms or schools or whatever, is also that the Web 2.0 world allows you to have instant feedback, okay? And that instant feedback has been proven over and over again to be the determining factor of the growth of learning. And that is both for adults and kids that we're talking about. Other ideas here, like I was thinking about the open house. Instead of doing it within the first 6 weeks, why not do it when Skills USA within your areas are getting geared up? Great way for the kids to sort of practice and get their things going. And the Skills USA website offers a lot of places that you can look at expanding careers within programs that you have and ideas. The career plan here, this was actually from SED's site. A lot of things that they talk about in terms of what school districts can and they suggest that they should do. Okay. And finally, the Shameless Promotion Department. I did write a book called the Superintendent's Rule Book. It's really for all administrators, just simple ideas based on, I don't know if you're NCIS fans, but I love Gibbs and his rules. Well, I decided to write a rule book for superintendents. The Gmail symbol there will take you to my Gmail account. I'd love to carry on any of the conversation that you might have and open that up to emails after the session. That's great. And finally, we're at time for any sort of questions or anything. I hope we still have some people there. How are we doing, Jared? Do we have any questions?
We certainly do, not in the chat. Someone had asked, so if you couldn't see it earlier, I did reshare the link to the slide deck.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
If you need that, please feel free to grab it before you leave or before the session ends. And there are no questions in the chat, so we can just open the floor. If you have a question for Patrick, feel free to unmute and we'll go from there.
This is the point you wished you had sort of a Venmo account. I could just give people money. Well, let me ask you some things. Anybody have an administrator they worked for early in their careers, like our friend from Cool Hand Luke? What's really scary is I'm seeing some heads going up and down. Yeah, I know.
There's always at least one, it seems.
And I had to educate people here earlier in this broadcast that Paul Newman was not just about salad dressing or salsa. Those are two pretty good things that they do. He was actually an actor. So I know I gave you a lot of things, and I know that you know, really the topic is crazy. But to give you a sense, my appreciation for administrators, when I'm training with a lot of administrators, especially people who are aspiring to be it, I talk a lot about how all administrators grow this supernatural ability that their head goes on a, you know, a 180-degree swivel. So the first slide of the presentation, I put it up there originally because it would look like a bunch of different types of school buses. And I'm like, that's great, you know, different components, is it? And then as I'm looking at the slide, my brain started going to, why are all the buses parked on the grass and not on the parking lot? You know, does the facilities director know this? You know, the skies look gray out. It's probably going to rain. So, you know, the bad news is once you retire, your brain still does this. Okay, so, you know, for those of you who are near that, beware. Any questions about the links or the sites or how to access them? Pretty self-explanatory, I think, for the most part.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's some good resources there, so make sure you check them out.
Yeah, like I said, one of the things that drives me crazy is the behemoth known as SED's website. So I try to parcel out things that would be specific to what you can. And, you know, if you're ever doing a website, the rule I was always taught was that nothing ever takes more than 3 clicks to get to it. I can't think of too many things that only take 3 clicks in that website. But,
yeah, they missed that memo.
Yeah. The thing that's kind of interesting with the whole thing, though, is that there is, if you really dig in there, some really interesting sort of resources. So those are the ones I pulled out for everybody that they could take a look at. And that's why I gave you the slide deck. Not a lot of words in the slide deck. So I could stay away from what we said, the pre, it's interesting, the pre-conference thing. I have to give kudos to Peter Dewitt. I don't know if you're aware of him. He's a nationally renowned speaker. He is a graduate, Jared, of Queensbury High School. He was actually a student athlete of mine 1,000 years ago. He's a retired administrator and writer. He's now a writer for Corwin Press and does a lot of stuff. But anyway, he came up with the idea of the pre-survey. It's great going to conferences and they have you fill out an evaluation after the conference. That kind of stinks for the participants, doesn't it? Now you're asking me what I wanted. now I get to tell you whether I liked what you had or not. You know, do it beforehand. So hopefully I hit all the key points that people were looking for. I appreciate a couple of people have written there about the good information there. Please feel free to follow up. You know, if you want to look at something and say, hey, you know what, I want to think about this, email me. Just put in the subject line, you know, what you want to talk about, and I'll get back to you soon. It's one of the benefits of being semi-retired. You get to sit here and stare at your computer a lot. But you know, I work with Ymaker out of the CTE TAC group. So if you ever need any follow-up stuff or anything like that, you know, feel free. And don't be afraid to buy the book.
All right. Thank you so much. And also, Rochelle has put a link to a survey for this session into the chat. So please take a quick moment to fill that out. And if you have any questions, now's your chance.
Yeah, is there anything that I didn't present in terms of the package resources that you might find helpful or maybe slightly disappointed or not there? And yes, feel free to use the calendar that I gave, monkey with it, make a copy of it, monkey with it, whatever way you want. Again, I am not dogmatic about the stuff that I put out. I think that that's kind of foolish. And plus it makes me sound like more like a snake oilsman, you know, salesman. I'm one person who had a couple ideas I borrowed from a lot of the people in interactions. You have to do what's right for you. And what's right for, Warren, Washington, Saratoga, Herkimer, Essex, BOCES may not be for Erie 1 or ONC BOCES or, Western Suffolk. But the ideas there, or the framework is there, at least you can use as a reference point and move it around. On the CTE site, I did a specific one for work-based learning. I believe it's still up there as an archive thing. That's not a bad thing for those of you who are work-based learning coordinators, where I dove into specifically the roles of that and the intersection with advisory teams. Because we talked about a lot of things here. I mean, being the liaison of a component district is all encompassing, to say the least.
All
Well,
right.
Jared, I think we've beaten this dead horse to the ground right now.
I think we're good. I haven't seen any questions come up into the chat, just a lot of thank yous for the resources.
Thank you.
So I'm sure people will be checking them out.
All right. Well, I hope so. And good luck to everybody. And hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today.
Thank you, Patrick.